Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for joining me for Real Talk NFT. As you know, I'm your host, Brian. We have a really special guest for you today, Anthony Georgiades, who's the co-founder of the Pastel Network. The Pastel Network is a really cool project. Really excited to talk to him about it. It's a fully decentralized, developer-friendly layer one blockchain. They're doing some big things in Web3, so just really happy to have Anthony on. Anthony, thanks for joining us today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be
Did
here.
I get your last name on that take? Give it to me.
Yep.
Okay. We don't have to edit it out, everyone. I got it.
Perfect.
So give us a little bit of background about you in Web3, your experience. Excited to learn a little about you as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of the co-founders of Pastel Network, and as you kind of alluded to, Pastel Network is a fully decentralized layer one blockchain, and we basically power infrastructure. It could be things like NFT copyright protection, permanent data storage, distributed storage, authentication, security, a variety of different infrastructure tools. And we power this infrastructure for the broader Web3 ecosystem. A lot of use cases within the NFT world, a lot of use cases within the broader Web3 world, DeFi applications, gaming, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
So our network serves as really an isolated application specific chain. We integrate with other large, well known blockchains, general purpose layer ones, layer two scaling solutions, and directly with dApps and applications as well. And we enable these networks to really leverage our services. So if you're an NFT marketplace on, let's say, Ethereum, and you need somewhere to host and store that data securely, you can store that on Pastel. If you need to be able to actually look at an NFT and authenticate it as being an original, we have a specific deep learning based technology that actually assesses the relative rareness of underlying metadata. Is this a duplicate? Is this existing somewhere else? Is this infringing on some sort of copyright? Whatever it might be. These are the tools that we power for the ecosystem, and we do it all in a completely decentralized, distributed way to really embody and fit in with the ethos of what we view as being a completely interoperable Web3 future.
So how'd you get involved? How'd you get involved with Pastel? Like, what attracted you to? I was going through the website quite a bit, and it seems like there's a lot of use cases that we'll probably talk about more during the podcast. And we were talking even before. I was like, this seems like a no-brainer for some companies to integrate. But how'd you even get involved with the Pastel?
Yeah, so some background on myself. I'm a general partner at Innovating Capital. We are a technology asset manager that focuses, I focus on Web3, on crypto, on digital assets. We've been involved in the industry since the pre-ICO boom in 2017. We have a pretty unique aspect with regards to the Web3 thesis of the portfolio. We're super involved in the projects that we engage with. So whether it's a layer one like conjunctive protocol, where we're running validator nodes in-house, we're one of the key market makers for some of the injective applications like Helix and things like that. So we get really hands-on with the protocols and networks that we're involved with. And we take really a thesis-driven approach to looking for investments and then becoming really network stewards in those ecosystems as well. And so Pastel was really born several years ago when we had kind of developed a thesis around what we saw as the future of the Web3 ecosystem. The necessity to have obviously general purpose layer one blockchains like Solana, like Ethereum, but also the importance of application specific blockchains to really service a lot of the gaps and shortcomings of general purpose L1s. Obviously, if you're building on Solana, there is a storage limit in terms of how much data can be stored on chain per block. Obviously, there's underlying infrastructure limitations in terms of the certain types of tools that can actually be run there. You have obviously a lot of centralized solutions, but not a lot of decentralized solutions. So one of the key theses that we had developed was the need for application-specific infrastructure developed via a decentralized L1. I had got to know who's now the CEO of Pastel, who shared a very much so similar vision about what the future looks like. And Pastel was really born out of quasi incubation from Innovating Capital to really come into the industry and be one of the predominant Web3 infrastructure players in the space, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw you had some recent announcements, like your, am I saying correctly, Monet 2.0 mainnet launch? Did I get it right?
Yeah. Monet 2.0.
Monet.
Yeah,
I should have known that. That's an obvious one. Monet 2.0. I was reading up on it a little bit, and it seemed really intriguing. I saw that like your Sense, your near duplicate NFT protection protocol, and even Cascade, kind of like the integration for like your storage layers. You mind touching base on those announcements and how they apply to Pastel?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Monet, this release it's really important. And actually, the release itself went live, and it's going to be fully activated in just under 1,000 or so blocks. Should be November 5th. So a couple of days here.
Nice.
It's going to be
Sunday.
Activated at block 575,000. And I'd say that this is by far the biggest release that we've done to date ever. We're super pumped about it. So let me just kind of give you some context and background on the network itself. Pastel is pretty interesting. It's as I mentioned, fully decentralized layer one blockchain. It is powered by a series of validators called, we call them supernodes. They're very similar to Ethereum validators in the sense that they require users to self-stake 5 million PSL, but they're a little bit different in the fact that they have very high computational requirements in terms of how many cores you need to run, how much RAM it requires, and how much obviously SSDs need to power it, because they're doing so many different services that power the blockchain. They're running Sense, which is our near duplicate NFT detection protocol. That's obviously running very high computationally intensive models to really assess the relative rareness of metadata, videos, pictures, whatever it might be. We have a rare on the internet feature, right? Which actually looks at, and imagine you basically are registering an NFT and is almost doing like a reverse image search on the internet itself. You can envision just how complex and computationally intensive that will be. Likewise, we have our underlying data storage protocol called Cascade, which is very unique. And you obviously mentioned the need for things like this across ecosystems like OpenSea or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Cascade is amazing because Cascade, from my perspective, is one of the most powerful aspects of this blockchain. Anytime a user sends a request to register data on the Pastel network, we take that data and, in simple terms, imagine that we take a piece of data, we copy it a bunch of different times, then we take all those copies and we cut them up into a bunch of different pieces and then randomly distribute them across the validators that are running the blockchain.
And those are your super nodes that you call them?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just making sure.
Exactly.
I wanted to make sure I was following there. Cool.
Exactly. So what's unique about Cascade versus other decentralized storage systems like IPFS or Arweave is that Cascade itself, it has redundancy, not just in the sense of being able to access and retrieve data, but in terms of how that data is stored. So just take IPFS, for example. IPFS is obviously completely distributed. It's completely trustless, right? Anybody can run an IPFS peer, right? Anyone in the world. It's completely open. Anybody can request to have a file stored on IPFS. And effectively what happens is an IPFS peer will pick up that file. It'll host that file on its peer. It'll issue a CID and content identifier, and anybody that's running IPFS can retrieve that. When you retrieve a file on IPFS, you're recursively looking for the peer that is hosting that, right? So it's great. It's open, decentralized, distributed. The issue is there's no mechanism in IPFS that ensures that that data is always going to be hosted and always guaranteed to be stored on any given peer. So we've seen even recently with some of the NFTs that have become less popular through kind of this kind of boom and bust phase that we're in right now, where it could take several hours to literally recursively iterate through every single peer, looking for a peer that's saying they're hosting this metadata or this file. And a lot of times the CIDs aren't even pinned anymore. So while it's distributed, it's not necessarily fully permanent or redundant. And that's kind of the inherent issue. And that's one of the biggest things that we've set to really solve upon, ensuring that the entire validator set, they're not just hosting random files, they're hosting random partitions or chunks of every single file. So that even if 75, 80% of the validators went down on the network, you could still retrieve the full file from the remaining active set of validators on the network itself. And that's what's really important with Cascade itself. So in Monet 2.0, this new duplicate NFT detection system comes live on mainnet. Cascade, fully live and activated on mainnet. Plus, we've added a lot of other kind of governance and key aspects to the system, something called storage challenges, right? Storage challenges are really our intrinsic proof of storage. Every single block, take a random set of validators, they check another random set of validators and say, are you storing the pieces of data for every file that you're supposed to be? If you're not, they get slashed, right? They are penalized, they're not getting protocol rewards, they might get jailed, etc. So we've really rolled out a ton of core functionality for these protocols, as well as enhancements in underlying governance to ensure really a well-functioning system. And that's what's so exciting about it. The last thing I'd say too, just to really touch on it, because it's really important to understand, if you think about the business model of Pastel Network and really other layer 1 blockchains or layer 2 solutions, is very similar, tangential to a API-based Web 2 business model, right? Somebody sends a request to store data on Pastel, and they pay per request, right? In terms of how much data is getting stored, the request call, whatever it might be, and they're charged on the underlying PSL token. And they could do this in a completely decentralized way, right? They could effectively run a full Supernode client within their own validator set. Or they could do it in kind of a bridged way, where they basically have an API key or token that effectively makes these calls for them directly. Not to get too complex in that aspect of it. What's super exciting is we released something called the Gateway. And you can almost think about Gateway as like Infura for Ethereum or Pinata or something like that.
Gotcha.
And Gateway is a completely kind of centralized hosted system that's run by the Pastel Foundation that allows us to easily grant and issue API key credentials to new parties that are looking to integrate with our infrastructure. They could be Web 2 players, they could be NFT marketplaces, they could be layer 1 protocols, whatever it might be. We effectively are able to issue them credentials as well as potentially API credits to their overall key itself, X amount of PSL to allow for a year of requests or whatever it might be. And we do this in such a way to really make it a lot more frictionless and streamline some of the onboarding processes. Because our whole objective, right now today is how do we maximize overall transaction growth and transaction volume, which will then drive protocol revenue, as well as the underlying deflationary mechanic of Pastel, which will be kind of the next thing I touch on briefly. Within Pastel, which is amazing, is as part of this upgrade, we also included a massive modification to how PSL fees are transacted. Today, if you're running a validator, you obviously earn block rewards. Every block, you have the ability to earn a piece of a block reward for validating, but you also earn transaction fees for facilitating these transaction requests, Cascade, sense requests, whatever it might be. Anytime a request is made, part of the fees are sent to supernodes for actually doing the work. Part of it is burnt. So we've included a burning mechanism in our overall token model that's activated at this activation height, which will ensure that there's a consistent deflationary mechanism. So the more that transactions accrue on the network, obviously the more quote unquote dividends are accrued to supernodes through protocol rewards and things like that. But the more PSL that's taken out of the network itself, an intrinsic deflationary mechanism. I think that's really important for the long-term token economic aspect of the system as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir. Anything deflationary, I'm into. Burning of tokens, limiting supply. It feels like that's a unique thing that we can do with crypto and digital assets overall, and makes things more rare, if you want to call it that way. Or more, and then hopefully hand in hand more valuable. So that's really cool that you've implemented that into the system. And just to peel back a little bit, so I want to make sure that I'm understanding everything correctly. So Cascade is your decentralized storage layer, and it kind of like breaks everything, shares different fragments between super nodes, and they almost, am I getting this right, or is it a sense where they do the self check within each other? I'm getting a
Cascade.
little confused. That's Cascade. Okay, and they do like a self check, making sure that they have the correct information at all times. If they don't, you said they get maybe pushed out of the poll or eliminated, whatever the protocol is there. Why is this? And again, this might be a stupid question, but that's what I'm here for. I ask the stupid questions to make it easy for everyone. What's the difference between what you're building in like just traditional cloud storage we hear and everyone talks about, like on the data set side?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in traditional cloud storage, right, it's very easy to, I mean, anything that is happening in Web3, in theory, is done more efficiently and better at scale in Web 2, right? No one's going to argue
True.
that. And if
Yeah.
they do, they might be somewhat delusional, right? You're always going to be able to transact in financial products with less friction, less execution risks, etc. You're not going to be paying exorbitant gas fees in the world of Web 2. It's going to be cheaper to store data. It's going to be cheaper to transact. Web 3 isn't necessarily trying to solve upon those particular problems. They're trying to take certain applications and ensure that on a globalized scale, right? While we can transact on, Charles Schwab or JP Morgan here today in the US with very little friction, there's limited access and there's limited entry points to a lot of these services to the rest of the world. It's very
Mm-hmm.
difficult. And I mean, even in the US, right? Think about how many people are able to actually trade stocks freely, right?
Yeah.
The world of DeFi is so powerful. I love to use kind of the analogy um, of futures or even kind of forwards, right? If I'm like, let's say a farmer, right, and I'm basically selling oranges in Florida, right? Let's say I have a small family-owned farm, and I think that the price of oranges is going to fall completely. But I have a massive, harvest right now, and I know that I have a massive harvest of oranges coming. How do I lock in to the current price of oranges, right, today? Some sort of kind of float to fixed rate contract. Likewise, I could want to speculate on the other side and say, I actually believe that it makes sense to sell some sort of contract on a fixed floating rate term. So the point is, if I'm that farmer, I'd have to call up Wells Fargo, Deutsche Bank, UBS, one of the top commodities derivatives provider, and they'll say, no, they'll quote me a minimum of 10 million of notional value, which obviously I don't have, right?
Yeah.
In the world of Web3, all of a sudden now I can go on to the Ethereum ecosystem onto some sort of DeFi application. And I can leverage smart contracts where if my notional value is $1 or $10 or 50 or whatever, millions of farmers can pull together automatically, seamlessly, without even thinking about it, and transact with a counterparty on the other side for whatever notional value they want, right? So small things like
Very
this,
cool. Yeah.
where it opens up the accessibility. So yeah, maybe I'm paying a higher gas fee than I would have if I transacted with Wells Fargo, but at the end of the day, I couldn't have transacted at all. The
Yeah.
similar can be said
Great
for
analogy.
other aspects of the ecosystem. When it comes to data storage, the problem is in the world of Web3, you have this concept of trustlessness, right? There's no trust involved. Trust is not a factor. You don't even think about it, which is kind of interesting, to really rationalize. When you're buying an NFT, and that NFT, you're buying I don't know, a Bored Ape, and you buy the underlying token ID for a smart contract that was deployed on Ethereum, but the underlying token ID references a photo that's stored off chain somewhere. If that data is stored on a centralized database and the creator decides to stop paying the fee or wants to change what's hosted there or whatever it might be, you've re-entered and you've really effectively broken the underlying primitives that underpin the Web3 ecosystem itself. So there needs to be solution points for things like data storage, for data security, for authentication that can be hosted in a completely trustless and decentralized fashion, which is why it's important to have services and features like Cascade and like Sense that are really built the way they are. So that if I do buy that Bored Ape and if it's stored on another L1 that's completely permissionless and decentralized, I know it's always going to be there. Cryptographically proven, it's always going to be there. The network's always
Yeah.
going to host it and store it. Sure, I can have a backup on AWS if I want, but I know that the way that Pastel works, the way that the underlying blockchain works, that data will be there forever. It'll never be lost. And again, I've removed the concept of trust from the underlying equation itself.
So talk to me about the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk interview. Did you hear that at all just recently? It was like on Halloween when basically Elon was all an NFT is a URL pointing to a JPEG. Did you see
Well,
that at all?
I mean, yeah, I mean, listen, he's not
He's not
wrong.
wrong.
Well,
Yeah,
exactly right. That's a
for
huge
cer-
aspect.
for cer- for certain collections and chains. I just want to call that out because I don't want the Bitcoin ordinal people coming pounding down my door. You can certainly have on-chain Ethereum items, everybody. But again, didn't mean to cut you off, but it seems like he wasn't wrong.
Well, listen, right? He's not wrong, but again, it's where that actual token URI is referencing, right? And most of the large scale NFT projects that right, Bored Apes, CryptoPunks, they have the data that's stored on IPFS. They're not just throwing it on an AWS server, right?
Yeah,
Um, and it's similar with respect to Cascade. I mentioned why I thought there were some inherent flaws with IPFS and why we're potentially more competitive with respect to IPFS. I do think that IPFS and Cascade definitely work together. IPFS could be like more of a hot storage solution. I want quick retrieval, but I want a cold backup of that data that I know is always going to be there.
always there.
So the point is, what Elon's mentioning is certainly a shortcoming of the system, which is exactly what we're looking to solve. And yeah, sure, that's all an NFT is today, but that's not what it's going to be. And there's so many different use cases and underlying applications for NFTs. I mean, when I first was looking at NFTs, profile pictures were the last thing that people thought ERC 721 was really going to be. This
Yeah,
was really born more out of like the STO craze, right? Securitization of specific tokens and things like that. How could we actually have slow moving, immutable type data that's represented by a token that doesn't necessarily need to have crazy high transaction velocity? So there was a lot more with regards to financial products, legal products, things like that. And we're starting to see those use cases emerge. So, I agree to an extent. And I think that the exact shortcoming and problem he pointed out is exactly what we're looking to solve.
yeah. I literally, whenever I knew this interview was coming up, and just so happens I caught that clip with Elon and Joe because it was like running rampant on crypto Twitter. I was like, this feels like it just goes hand in hand with our talk with Anthony. So interesting how that works out. And my personal opinion of it is if the market wants things more on chain, and you're doing something right now for several solutions, the market will develop, the technology will develop, and that's like not, it's not so much of a shortcoming in my eyes. Like for some projects, that's a good point to bring up, and I'm glad you brought that up and made people aware. But I was like, I don't think it's going to affect the future too much. And then also, there's a lot of things that like why NFTs are important, just from being able to claim the digital identity or claim the digital asset, and it wasn't even really brought up to always be on chain. But moving forward, I think that's probably the world we're going to move into, and it makes the most sense. talk to me a little bit about how Cascade can integrate into like current like NFT like standards and blockchain ecosystems. Is it pretty? I know you're talking about APIs, but is it pretty easy for partnerships and collabs to just integrate with your platform?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, listen, there's the world of interoperability is obviously that's the end game, right? That's the end goal here. And everyone's looking to figure out how to achieve, pure interoperability in a completely trustless fashion. We've seen a lot of cross-chain token swaps, cross-chain bridges, things like that. And there's been a lot of fatal flaws in the setups. And largely, it has nothing to do with the core blockchain. It has nothing to do with the core ecosystem or the core protocol. It has everything to do with effectively a centralized bridge that's interacting between the two, that's susceptible to theft, hacks, fraud, things like that. Um, what we're focused on right now is, in tandem, a combination of both getting some of these ecosystems up and running as soon as possible, to really start to activate and transact on the Pastel network, via this gateway that I mentioned that
Yeah.
acts kind of like, again, in Fura, while we continue to work on refining how we really integrate in a pure interoperable fashion. So, for example, in the Polkadot ecosystem, one thing that we're really looking into is the validator set of supernodes on Pastel now could intrinsically host a parachain, right? And so now validators themselves on Pastel Network are running an entire Pastel Network parachain. So they understand the full state of transactions across both networks at any point in time. And that's extremely powerful. There's a lot of obviously technical and fundamental barriers to achieving that, but that's how I really kind of think across the two aspects of the system independently.
How do you see it? Like, how do you see Cascade like impacting the broader like NFT marketplaces in the macro industry overall?
hmm I think what's going to happen over time is that there's going to be a lot more credence that drives how things are minted or registered or whatnot. Right now, you don't really necessarily think about it. You didn't necessarily really think about it in the NFT boom. It was kind of a byproduct. It was the last thing you
Yeah.
thought about. Where is this data stored? I don't know. I just need a mint,
Yeah.
right? I need to get this mint of this new collection. Moonbirds is coming out. I need it. Whatever, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it was the last thing on your mind. Moving forward, when a lot of that kind of craze falls and NFTs really start to serve as what they were supposed to be, slow moving, immutable objects with large amounts of data integrity tied to them, then you start to really leverage and look at that data storage and redundancy as one of the top priorities in terms of how you assess value, how you assess some of the potential security constraints, some of the underlying requirements for even looking to invest or acquire a specific token standard, right? So it's one of those things that, in the Web2 world, data storage feels like a commodity. If things are right in the Web3 world, everyone will be using, Cascade, and no one will say what Cascade is. It's just a commoditized piece of data storage. You're using IPFS for hot, you're using Cascade for cold, you're using this or that, or whatever it might be. And I don't think we're far from that. And there's been a lot more interest and demand for this type of tooling in the last 6 to 12 months than there was in the height of 2020, 2021, as well as it's now being driven across new types of use cases. DEXs, for example. We're talking with Solana about an archive node solution, right? Where effectively, they need to have an archive of all data on Solana at every single block, right? Where they send Cascade a snapshot of all the data that occurred from block X to block X plus 10 every 10 blocks. Boom, boom, boom. Um, and so these are things that are really important. And as we really start to gear up and these applications become far more prevalent in mainstream use cases, data storage is going to be a driving factor for it all.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's essentially just pretty much telling me the safest way cold storage you can save some of this data for the Solanas of the world. I think I brought up before the call. I was like, when's OpenSea getting on this? It seems only natural that they need to implement this, or am I just coming out of left field?
No,
But
you're totally right.
they need to nail this down, OpenSea.
You're totally right.
I guess one more question I have for you about Cascade, and you touched on it a little bit about like the self-checking systems, but what overall like security protocols? I mean, you're getting some like high-level data, but it's all being fragmented, it sounds like, and checking. If I'm understanding this correctly, is that enough to like keep any potential threats away from, any hackers or anybody trying to infiltrate your system there?
First, what I would say to the audience is definitely go to Pastel Network. You can go to technical papers. We have a full yellow paper on Cascade that details at the most technical complexity how the system works and operates. Every aspect of the system has been thought out to really think through what you mentioned, right? We use a special type of LT encoding algorithm that figures out the right way to take this data and chop it up into chunks. How we actually use a redundancy factor to copy those chunks. How we effectively take the hash of each of those chunks and seed it into the blockchain itself. So there's also a privacy preserving functionality in Cascade in terms of how a user could say that I want this data to be stored and only this person with a key can retrieve it, but don't need to touch on that. But at the end of the day, the system itself is entirely robust from a security functionality. Again, if there was a 51% hack or a 2/3, really a 66% attack, would be required to reverse and roll back the chain and change, the hashes of each of these partitions. But to where the system is today, we're very robust against those potential shortfalls.
Very nice. Well, it seems almost like a no-brainer to me for, everything that's been being talked about over just the past few weeks, past few months. It seems like there would be a natural transition, especially at Cascade. Can we touch base on Sense one more time?
Yeah. Sense is the near duplicate NFT detection protocol. We take basically an NFT, we take any sort of data. Imagine it like this. We use a very robust deep learning algorithm. We've been using AI for a while. We're not an AI company, but AI has been a huge part of what we do, right? We transform using basically this convolutional neural network of sorts, any specific object into a fingerprint. A fingerprint can be represented by a multi-dimensional array of numbers. So take an abstract file, take a video, whatever it is. We use these models to transform it into a fingerprint. That fingerprint then, basically, we use statistical techniques to assess how similar or dissimilar two fingerprints are to another. So we can assign what's the likelihood that this is a duplicate and how much similar is it to a duplicate. What's crazy too is what we've been doing, not part of Monet 2.0, but just in terms of the roadmap of Pastel itself is we've been taking the models we've created and we've been retraining them on AI models. And so I just told you that we could look at two photos side by side and say this is how similar or dissimilar it is. And it's completely robust to transformations. So if you gave me a photo, right, and I made a bunch of invisible changes, or if I morphed two photos together, right, this system would be able to look at it at really kind of the pixel level and say, hey, this is a 50% similar copy to this other photo. Whereas other systems that exist today just take what's called the perceptual hash and say, yeah, this is a duplicate. No, it's not. But those systems aren't robust to these types of transformations, right? We're really doing something that's very deep and intrinsic to the underlying data itself. Moving forward, what I was getting at is we've been retraining these data models on AI models themselves. So we'll also be able to discern whether or not this specific data was generated by AI or not. And actually, more specifically, in some cases, what AI model it was. And this is also extremely important. And this is one of those things, too, where there might be a lot of Web 2 applications for this type of software itself, But if it's not being run on a decentralized, trustless system, how much credence are you going to give to the underlying
Exactly.
output that it gives you? And so that's one of the most exciting use cases that I'm really pumped about in the coming months, is just working through this. I'd say it's maybe 85, 90% the way there. It's never going to be 100%. There's always going to be some sort of noise or error, like there is if you use ChatGPT today. But we're excited when we get to the point where there's less than 1% noise in the system itself, where we feel like it's ready for production at scale.
I love it. That seems cool because AI art, we can go on for a 40-minute podcast about like where that even falls in the world. Is it authentic? Is it not authentic? I have feelings on both sides, but being able to at least have a system to decipher and understand that is cool. And I love how you gave it you call it like a fingerprint. So that just seems to resonate with me on how you could, identify some of these issues, I should say. Any partnerships? Or I know you said Sense is like 85% up. Any partnerships you're working with on either Sense or Cascade that you would love to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a couple of the RFPs that I alluded to that we're working on right now. We're launching something with SensiNode in South America that'll be doing a lot of staking for supernodes. That'll actually be announced in the next week or so.
Cool.
We have a couple big L1. I mean, we have partnerships today with Polygon, Avalanche, and so we'll be really putting live a ton of those marketplaces and applications that are already embedded in those underlying partnerships that we have with them. And then we have a few big L1s and a few big L2s in the works right now.
Awesome. I don't know. I'm not like the most technical guy, but everything that you're telling me makes a ton of sense. And I'm going to get off this podcast and keep scratching my head why like major marketplaces aren't absolutely using, especially Cascade in my eyes. It just seems like it makes so much sense. No pun intended.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's one of those things. I think that Gateway will remove a lot of those frictions in terms of utilizing it, but you know the state of the market. People are fighting to survive right now, and the last thing that they're thinking about is how to enhance their technological foundation when they're fighting for transaction volume and user retention.
Yeah, good point. Good point. But the in my eyes, I'm a Web3 bull, NFT bull, crypto bull. I've survived through too many bear markets, got wrecked a couple times, came back out on top. So these bear markets, I think it's great. Like meeting guys like you, companies like you that it's cliche to say, but you're building, you're building in a space when the time's down, when it's low, but you're really building a product that's going to enhance us for years down the line. So super excited to see, how this all continues to develop. We would even love, with like years in Web3 world are like dog years. So maybe have you on, sooner rather than later, get an update on some of the partnerships and some of the implementations you've made. You want to give a shout out to our customers or our audience where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely follow us on Twitter at Pastel Network. Check out our website, pastel.network. If you go to our website or our Twitter, you'll get links, to whether you're a developer, to our developer docs, to our gateway, to our GitHub repos, things like that, tools for builders, tools for collaborations, things like that. If you're in the community and you want to understand what we're working on, join our Discord. Obviously, follow us on Twitter for the latest and greatest. We do have a no-code minting platform called SmartMint, which we didn't really touch on, but I love SmartMint. SmartMint is a centralized application that runs on all of the infrastructure powered by Pastel, that we've really built in-house. So if you're a creator and you're looking to mint your NFT collection,
Love that,
and you want it to be stored on Cascade, you want Sense, you want all that cool infrastructure, but you don't want to touch it because it's very complex. No code, drop, click, boom, you're done. So that's SmartMint. But yeah, all this stuff is readily accessible and available. So definitely, excited to stay in touch and go from there.
Yeah, I'll make sure I put all these links down below the video for everyone to find out. SmartMint sounds really cool. That seems, hey, no code, make it easy for everyone. Let's have some fun with it. So I'll absolutely put this information down below the description for the video. Anthony, thank you for joining me. Really had fun talking to you and learning all about your project.
You too. Awesome, man. Talk soon.
All right. Thanks.